cold wind moved across the open plains near the foothills, carrying dust, sage, and a strange kind of quiet that felt older than the land itself. Travelers who passed that way often said the silence seemed to speak if a man stood still long enough. The lonely ranch house stood far from town, built with rough hands and long nights, shaped by a man who had known more empty rooms than warm voices. He lived with cattle, wild horses, sunburned fences, and the kind of heart that still believed something good might happen one day. Folks in town called him stubborn for holding on to hope in a place where winters were harsh. Earth was dry, and dreams took their last breath before sunrise. Yet he stayed, because leaving meant admitting he had nothing left to wait for. He always believed the prairie took nothing without giving something back in time. He often rode toward the quiet hills where tall trees guarded the land belonging to an Apache camp that lived not far from his range. He never crossed their line with disrespect, and he always spoke low, like a man who understood he was near ground that held history and meaning. The rancher rarely talked about why he kept riding near those hills. Maybe he found peace there. Maybe he felt less alone when he saw distant smoke rising from their fires. Proof that somewhere close, families shared life and stories. In town, many spoke with suspicion, carried old fears, and judged what they did not understand. But he was different. He believed that land belonged to those who respected it, not those who wanted to rule it. He never carried pride like a weapon, only kindness like a quiet promise no one heard. One afternoon, while the sun slipped behind, scattered clouds and shadows stretched like long gray ribbons, he saw her for the first time. She stood near a narrow stream, bending to collect water in a clay bowl. Her dark hair was braided with thin strips of colored cloth, and her dress brushed softly against tall grass. She looked calm but carried a guarded stillness, like someone who had learned to hide pieces of herself. She kept her face turned away the moment she sensed someone watching. He sat on his horse a good distance back, not wanting her to feel cornered or stared at. She never lifted her eyes toward him, not once, yet he felt something settle in his heart that he could not name. He rode away slowly, careful not to disturb her or leave any sign of being near. That night, he sat by the small fire outside his porch and kept seeing her in his mind. Not because she looked like any storybook beauty, but because she held the kind of silence that matched his own. He wondered if she had ever trusted someone enough to speak freely. He wondered what she feared, what she dreamed, and whether she ever wished for someone safe to share her thoughts with. But he also knew better than to assume anything. Respect meant distance, until trust had space to grow. He told himself he would never approach her with selfish reasons or push her into anything she did not want. He had lived long enough to understand that real connection did not start with demands. Days passed, and he saw her again near the forest edge with other Apache women. Each time he kept his distance, tipping his hat in a quiet greeting. The others sometimes glanced his way, some curious, others cautious, yet she never looked at him. She faced the trees, the earth, or the sky, but never toward him. Some men might feel insulted or lose patience, but he felt nothing like that. Instead, he felt drawn to her silence, believing there was a story behind it. He had known people who hid pain under loud words, but she hid hers behind stillness, which was harder to read and easier to respect. When he rode back home each time, he wondered why he kept feeling the urge to see her again even though she never acknowledged him. One evening, rain clouds gathered fast, and lightning flashed near the ridge. He was heading home when he heard a frightened cry from the direction of tall cedar trees. He turned his horse without thinking and raced toward the sound. He found her standing near a fallen branch where a young child had slipped and hurt his leg. She held the child, trying to calm him while fear trembled in her breath. The rancher stopped several steps away and spoke gently, offering help without stepping closer. She still refused to look at him, not even when he wrapped his bandana to slow the bleeding. She accepted his help but kept her eyes down like she feared that meeting someone's gaze might give away more than words ever could. When the injury was secure enough to move, he lifted the child carefully and guided them back toward the outer side of the Apache settlement without crossing deeper into their ground. Near the edge of their land, an older man came forward, strong-willed and sharp-eyed, took the child and spoke a few guarded words. The rancher nodded, stepped back, and walked away without expecting thanks or approval. He was almost back to his horse when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned slowly and saw it was her again, though she still would not look at his face. She stood there as rain started falling, thin drops turning earth dark. He felt something pulling him to speak, not to persuade, promise, or impress, but simply to show he understood her silence. In a calm voice, he said he was not there to rush her into seeing him, knowing him, or trusting him. He said time was the only honest bridge between strangers. She did not speak a single word, only tightened her shawl around her shoulders and turned away as thunder rolled across the sky. He stood there without calling her back, whispering his final words, like a vow formed by a man who had lived enough years alone to know what respect meant. He told her he would wait until she was ready, whenever that might be, even if it took seasons, storms, or more silent meetings, where not a single word was shared. The rain kept falling, and she kept walking toward the camp without turning her face. That night, he returned to his porch with wet clothes and a mind full of questions. He did not know if she believed his words, or if she even cared, but something inside him felt changed. Silence no longer felt empty. The wind outside picked up again, shaking window frames and carrying distant drum sounds that mixed with thunder. He sat there, staring into the dark plains, wondering if waiting would lead him toward something real or break him even more than loneliness ever had. He could no longer pretend his heart had not shifted. Deep down, he sensed that her silence was not refusal, but protection. And he knew any wrong step might close the door forever. Somewhere in the shadows of the hills, she might have been thinking. 2. Deciding whether a man outside her world could ever be trusted with a story she had never spoken. But he had no way of knowing, only waiting, while something unseen kept building between them like a quiet fire no one had named yet. He slept little that night, waking every time the wind bumped against the loose boards of his house. His mind kept returning to her, not with wild dreams or foolish fantasies, but with a quiet ache he could not name. He wondered what had shaped her silence. Maybe she had lost someone. Maybe she had been hurt by someone who spoke gentle words but broke trust like dry wood. Maybe her people warned her never to look at men outside their world. He did not judge. He only wished he understood the weight she carried so he could stand on the right side of it. The rancher had lived long enough to know that silence sometimes hid deeper stories than anger ever could. Morning came with soft gold light. He walked outside and looked toward the far hills where a faint smoke trail curled into the sky. He felt drawn there again, but he reminded himself not to act like a man chasing something he wanted. Respect meant waiting without forcing fate. Instead, he spent the day working with the cattle, mending a broken fence, and clearing rain-soaked branches from the yard. All the while, thoughts kept drifting back to her, blending into every sound around him. He had never known someone who did not even look at him could stay in his heart so strongly. It was not desire or pride. It was something softer, like recognizing a similar lameness in someone else, even if no words were spoken. That afternoon he saddled his horse and rode out not to seek her, but to check the land near the creek where storms had hit hardest. The soil was dark and heavy, and water still traveled fast down the slope. As he passed between the scattered trees, he noticed footprints near the stream, small and light, as if someone had been moving with caution. Beside them were marks that looked like a dragging branch, which puzzled him. He dismounted and studied the ground. It appeared the footprints belonged to her or someone close to her size. He hoped there was no trouble, yet worry already began shaping uneasy thoughts. He followed the tracks only long enough to confirm they led toward the Apache territory before turning back. It was not his place to invade, question, or assume. Trust was fragile. Stepping too far might turn goodwill into suspicion. He went to town the next day for supplies, hoping work and familiar voices would settle his thoughts. People greeted him politely, but he sensed they still viewed him as the rancher who stayed too close to Apache land. Some whispered that he might be hoping for trade or friendship that would never come. Others joked that he had lost his mind to empty hills and quiet trees. He did not argue. It was not worth explaining something he himself could barely understand. He bought flour, salt, rope, and a small tin of ointment in case the injured child still needed healing. The shopkeeper asked if he planned a long ride. He shrugged and said he just liked being prepared. The woman behind the counter nodded with a knowing look, but did not press further. People who live on the edge of the frontier learned to read those who carried silent burdens before returning home. He visited the far side of town where several families lived in tents and wagons. Having lost their land or moved from distant places, there he saw a traveling preacher speaking about patience, forgiveness, and understanding among neighbors. The rancher paused to listen for a moment. The preacher said that some hearts heal slower than seasons, and that the strongest love or friendship begins with listening. Those words sank in quietly. He took them with him as he rode away, not as advice for romance, but as truth for any fragile bond. That night he prepared a small basket with dried meat, a few apples, and the ointment. He placed it at the edge of the boundary where the forest shadow began. He did not leave a note or mark. He placed it gently and returned home without looking back. The next morning, the basket was gone. Nothing else was left behind. No tracks he could clearly read, no sign of who had taken it. He did not expect thanks. The simple act made him feel at ease, like he had done what any decent man would. Days passed quietly. He focused on ranch work, while keeping a respectful distance from their land. Yet he noticed faint changes. Once he saw smoke rise in 2 thin lines instead of 1, which he thought might be a signal used among their people. Another time he found fresh wild herbs tied near the path, something Apache women often used for healing. He understood it might be a silent acknowledgement even if not meant for him alone. These small signs filled him with quiet gratitude. One cool evening, as he led his horse near the creek, he saw her again. She was alone, gathering water with steady hands. He stopped far enough not to intrude and offered only a gentle greeting. She stood still for a moment, holding the clay bowl, but she still did not look his way. Yet he noticed she did not turn her back either. This small change felt larger than spoken thanks. Her posture no longer showed fear, only distance. He kept his voice calm and warm, telling her the child was in his thoughts and that he hoped healing was steady. She did not answer, but he heard a faint breath that sounded less tense. Before leaving, he said he wanted no debt or praise, only peace between neighbors. She remained fixed on the flowing water, hands shaking slightly, as if pulling memories from the deep. Months passed through slow changes in weather. Snow touched the high peaks, frost-coated window edges, and the cattle grew thicker coats. He saw her a few more times near the stream, in the meadow, or gathering berries with others. She still did not meet his eyes, but she no longer pulled away when he appeared. Sometimes he heard her voice from a distance speaking to her people. Her tone carried strength, not fear. He wondered what kind of past shaped such boundaries. He also wondered if she ever spoke of him at all. One late winter morning, while tending his horse in the barn, he heard a quiet knock at his door. Rarely did anyone visit, especially not that early. He walked out slowly and saw a young Apache boy standing near the porch steps. The child looked familiar, though he was not the same injured one. The boy held a small bundle wrapped in hide. He placed it on the porch, nodded once, and turned to leave. The rancher gently called out, asking if everything was all right. The boy stopped, looked down, and said only that the woman near the creek wished to return something. Without another word, he hurried back toward the trees. Inside the hide wrapping, the rancher found the same bandana he had used months ago, washed and neatly folded. Beside it lay a carved wooden bead, shaped like a tiny leaf. He held it with care, unsure of its meaning, yet knowing it was not random. Perhaps it was thanks. Perhaps it meant she now saw him as someone safe, even if she could not look at him yet. He placed the bead near his bed, where he knew he would notice it every night before sleep. A few days later, he found himself thinking about something more than simple goodwill. He wondered if her silence was not only fear, but a shield shaped by experience. Maybe trust was not impossible, only slow like winter thaw. Still, he reminded himself not to rush hope. He believed that life on the frontier taught patience better than any book or sermon. Water shaped stone over time, not by force. As spring approached, the land awakened. Birds filled the sky. Grass returned with soft green blades, and riders from distant ranches began passing through again. One evening, An older rancher visited and warned him that some travelers had been stirring trouble around native lands, accusing them of taking supplies from abandoned camps. The lonely rancher felt unease ripple in his chest. He feared that misunderstanding could spread quickly and bring harm where none was deserved. He resolved he would never allow blame to fall without truth. Something inside him told him that this peace was fragile. It's like thin ice over running water that same week. He noticed heavy tracks near the boundary, not from Apache hunters, but from unfamiliar horses. He followed the signs quietly and found broken branches and torn bark. The marks were careless, rough, not respectful of the land. The rancher knew this was not a good sign. Tension could ignite easily if people accused each other without proof. He feared that the quiet bond he was slowly forming with her could be shaken before it even began to grow. That night he stood on his porch again, facing the hills where small fires glowed like stars on earth. He hoped they were safe. He hoped she felt safe. His heart grew heavy with the unanswered question that hovered in the air like a silent prayer. Would she ever trust him enough to meet his eyes? Or would the world around them break the fragile thread before it even formed into something real? The following nights felt longer than usual, heavy with thoughts he could not shake. He kept replaying the signs left behind by unknown riders, wondering if they had been scouting, planning, or simply passing by. The area near the Apache land had always been calm, held together by unspoken respect. But change often arrived quietly before anyone sensed it. He walked around his property more often now, checking fences, listening to distant sounds, and watching for unusual movement. He had lived through times when despair spread quicker than kindness, and when small understandings turned into storms no one could control. Somewhere deep inside he feared that the fragile bond forming between him and her might become tangled in troubles neither asked for. A few days later, he rode toward the foothills at sunrise to check for fresh tracks. Birds scattered from the trees, but the air felt wrong, like silence had thickened. At the creek he noticed scattered ashes, signs of a small fire recently put out. He touched the ground and found it still warm. He looked around with careful eyes, and far in the distance, he saw two riders moving slowly along the ridge. They weren't wearing Apache clothing, and they weren't ranch hands from nearby lands. He did not follow them. He only watched until they faded into the tree line. He understood that stepping toward danger without reason could be seen as provocation, but remaining unaware could be worse. That evening, instead of leaving another basket or offering, he simply sat outside with a small lantern, hoping it would show he remained close. Not as a threat, but as someone willing to guard the peace. While he sat, memories from his younger days returned. He remembered how he once loved a woman from town who had soft hands and gentle voice, but she left because she could not bear the loneliness of living so far from people. She had wanted music, laughter, and walls that did not creak with the cold wind. He could not blame her. When she left, his heart closed slowly, like a door that would no longer swing freely. Maybe that was why he understood the Apache girl's silence so deeply. Both of them carried unfinished stories that kept them cautious. While the rancher lived in quiet observation, life at the Apache camp was shifting too, though he could only guess at the details. One late afternoon, he saw two Apache boys patrolling the outer woods with bows over their shoulders. They moved with sharp awareness, looking for signs, listening for change. He stayed out of sight so they would not think he was spying. His only wish was to avoid any misunderstanding. He did not want their suspicion to turn toward him, or worse, toward her. He believed trust grew slower than grass roots and could be torn faster than loose cloth. Days later, while collecting firewood near the slope, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned gently and saw the same Apache boy who had once returned the bandana. The boy seemed restless. He pointed toward the distant ridge and said someone had been watching their camp at night. The rancher asked how long it had been happening. The boy replied in a hesitant tone that it had been noticed for 3 nights, and their elders suspected trouble might be coming. He asked the boy if they believed it was ranchers or strangers. The boy shrugged, saying no one knew for sure. The rancher offered to help watch the area from his side of the land, without stepping into their territory. The boy listened, nodded slowly, and walked away without promising anything. The rancher took his silence as acceptance of his goodwill, even if not agreement. That night he could not rest. He stayed outside with his horse saddled, a lantern covered to hide the light and a rope ready in case he needed to move fast. He was no warrior, no trained scout, and he had no intention to play hero, but he knew the land well enough to notice changes. Near midnight he heard something faint, like dry leaves crushed under steady steps. He moved quietly toward a large oak and stayed behind it, peering into the dark. He saw a shadow moving across the field, slow but intentional. He leaned closer, trying to see details. The stranger wore a long coat and carried something long in his hand. But the rancher could not tell if it was a walking stick or a rifle. He knew better than to confront a shadow alone in the dark. Instead, he whispered a silent prayer that trouble would not fall on innocent people. Morning arrived with a gray sky and a restless wind. He rode toward the town, thinking he might gather information without raising suspicion. At the saloon, he noticed new men sitting near the back table, rough and tired, like they had been traveling without sleep. He listened from a distance as they talked about land, gold rumors, and unmarked hunting grounds. One of them mentioned Apache land in a tone that did not sound respectful. The rancher felt heat rise in his chest. For a moment, he considered speaking, but he reminded himself that anger did not solve anything. He left quietly before words turned into trouble. On the way home, his thoughts churned. He wondered if these new men were connected to the shadows near the ridge. He wondered if they came seeking something the Apache people wanted to protect. He also wondered if she knew any of this or felt safe among her own people. When he reached his ranch, he noticed something unexpected near his porch. A bundle of herbs and 2 small painted stones rested against the door. He recognized the herbs as ones used for protection or spiritual strength. He picked them up carefully, believing someone from the camp had placed them there as a sign of trust or warning. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was an elder trying to tell him they were aware of his silent watch and did not consider him an enemy that night. Long before sleep, he stood outside again near the sound of coyotes far off. He finally allowed himself to speak softly to the open air, not expecting anyone to hear. He said he was not looking for reward or praise, only hoping that no harm would fall on those who kept to their own way of life. Unknown to him, someone was nearby listening, hidden in the dark. A faint movement near the trees showed that the Apache girl stood behind the shadows, wrapped in her shawl, listening to his words. He could not see her, and she did not step closer. For her trust had always been carved slowly. She had been taught that words from outsiders were like wind, changing directions without warning. She had once known someone who seemed kind, but broke promises that left deep marks inside her. Since then, she avoided looking directly into the eyes of men, believing that eye contact was like opening a door that could not be closed. Yet she watched the rancher closely from afar, noticing how he walked with careful steps, how he never raised his voice, and how he always left room for her to choose distance. Inside her heart, a conflict formed. She feared him, yet something about his patience stirred questions she was not ready to face. She asked herself why he had not tried to speak to her through forceful means like others she had once met in her early years. Why did he always leave space for her to breathe instead of trying to take it? She had never met a man who believed waiting was part of respect. Part of her wanted to trust the idea of kindness, but another part held firmly to past lessons that warned trust could turn into heavy loss. Meanwhile, tension around the land continued to grow. Unknown men visited the nearby ridges at night, leaving broken twigs and scattered ashes behind. The Apache elders gathered in quiet circles, speaking in low tones. The rancher could only observe from the outside, feeling helpless and restless. He wished he could speak directly to her, not to demand answers, but to offer his help openly. Yet he feared that one wrong word might push her farther away. The land seemed to hold its breath, like it knew the next turn of events could change everything. The rancher stood at the edge of his porch one night, staring toward the dark line of trees, thinking about choices that were not fully his to make, wondering if the silence between him and her would one day become a bridge, or a wound that never healed. The uneasy days that followed felt like walking across thin ice, with no sign of where it would crack. Every sunrise brought a new question. Every sunset carried a quiet warning. The rancher kept his distance from their land, but never stopped watching the borders. Not with the eyes of someone seeking secrets, but with the heart of someone worried trouble could spread like fire across dry grass. He checked the creek trails, the open plains, and the high ridge where shadows had been spotted. Nothing seemed calm anymore. Even the wind felt different, carrying sounds that made the hair on his neck rise. Once, he thought he heard a distant scream, but it might have only been a wildcat echoing through the canyon. Still, he could not forget it. One evening, as he rode along the boundary, he saw two figures among the trees. They were not Apache people, and they were not ranchers from nearby land. They held maps and whispered in rough voices. He stopped his horse behind a cluster of bushes, careful not to be seen. One of them pointed toward the Apache camp and said they could find something valuable there if they just got close enough. The rancher felt his stomach tighten. The men turned and began walking uphill toward a hidden path that led near the settlement. He did not follow them too closely, but he tracked them long enough to learn that they planned to return at night when campfires dimmed. When he rode home, the sky was fading into dark blue, and the first star shined over the valley like a silent witness. The rancher sat on his porch for a long time, trying to decide what to do. He knew if he warned the tribe directly, some might suspect he was involved or trying to hide something. Trust between cultures was fragile, especially when history carried wounds that never healed completely. Yet staying silent felt wrong. The thought of harm reaching innocent families made his chest ache. His hand brushed over the carved wooden bead she had returned to him. He closed his fist around it, letting the small object remind him of something worth protecting. He whispered that he could not stand aside when danger walked so close. Over the next few days, he made quiet preparations on his land in case something unfolded that required safety or shelter. He stored extra water, tightened the barn door hinges, checked his rope, and sharpened simple tools. Not for conflict, but for rescue if needed. He even prepared a second lantern and placed it on the corner of his porch as a sign in case someone needed help at night. When he finished, he stood back and hoped it would never be needed. Meanwhile, at the Apache camp, she felt the shift too. She had seen strangers near the woods and heard elders talk in serious tones. Her heart stayed tense, especially when she remembered the rancher's voice speaking to the night, promising peace and offering silent protection. She felt torn between caution and something new inside her that felt almost like hope. Each time she remembered his patient tone. She wondered if he truly meant the words he said, or if life would reveal something different. She had lived by the belief that promises from outsiders could break more than bones. Yet, she could not ignore how his actions never matched the cruelty she once experienced in her early years. Her thoughts circled back to one memory she never shared. When she was younger, her family had allowed a traveler near their land. He spoke kindly, promised good trade, and won trust slowly. But his heart changed when he learned they would not reveal where sacred herbs grew. He left angry and returned later with others, causing trouble and fear. Since that day, she believed that looking into someone's eyes meant opening a door too wide. She decided she would rather look at rivers, earth, and sky than risk meeting eyes that could turn cold. That old wound still lived inside her, shaping every guarded breath she took now. Because of the new strangers nearby, that old fear awakened again, stronger than before. She watched her people discuss how to protect their borders without bringing unnecessary conflict. Some wanted to warn the outsiders immediately, while others believed it was better to watch them quietly first. Among all these voices, hers stayed silent. But her heart kept calling the same name in quiet thought. The rancher who had shown patience where others showed demand. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the creek, she noticed hoofprints that did not belong to ranch horses or tribal ponies. She kneeled near the ground and ran her finger along the track. She recognized the pattern from the ridge, close to where the strangers were seen. Her breath caught. She turned slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved, yet she felt watched. She returned to camp quickly, covering her tracks carefully. That night, the wind picked up, and the clouds gathered over the hills. Storms always made her uneasy, not because of thunder, but because danger often used storms as cover. She stood near the tree line wrapped in her shawl, staring into darkness, while others settled near the fires. From where she stood, she could faintly see the ranch house lantern glowing on his porch like a small promise against fear. She lowered her gaze, unsure whether to trust that light or stay hidden behind caution. Hours later, as rain tapped softly on the leaves, the rancher saddled his horse again, unable to sit still. His instincts told him the strangers were close, and storms often made steps harder to hear. He rode toward the ridge with no plan except to watch. He understood he was only one man, but sometimes one man noticing danger early could prevent a disaster no one could repair. He stopped his horse near a large rock and dismounted, letting the rain soak into his coat. As he crouched down, he heard rustling ahead. Two shadowy figures moved between trees, whispering urgently. One carried a bag, the other pointed toward the camp. The rancher tightened his jaw. If they reached the tribe while everyone rested, fear and misunderstanding could explode without a single word. He stepped back, thinking fast. Approaching them directly could trigger trouble, yet waiting could allow them to move freely. Desperation pushed him to take a risk he had avoided before. He sped toward the Apache border, staying in sight but not close enough to startle. Rain hit his face, blurring his vision, but he kept going until he neared where guards usually watched. He called out in a steady voice, asking to speak, not demanding. Two Apache men approached, tense but calm. He bowed his head slightly, showing respect before breathlessly explaining what he saw. The men exchanged a serious look, then disappeared toward camp to alert others. The rancher stayed where he stood, soaked and shivering, his heart racing. He knew offering help in this moment meant stepping into a world he had always respected from afar. After several minutes, an elder appeared. He studied the rancher with eyes that held history. The rancher repeated what he saw, making clear his concern was for safety, not favor. The elder listened without interrupting. When he finished, the elder nodded slowly, acknowledging the warning. The rancher did not ask to join them or cross deeper. He simply backed away, believing he had done what he could. While turning to leave, he heard movement in the shadows. She was there. Rain shined on her face, her hair covered by her shawl. She stood still, staring at the ground, her breath visible in the cold air. He felt a rush of emotions, but remained quiet. After a long pause, she lifted her gaze a little, not fully meeting his eyes, but close enough that he saw the reflection of the stormy sky in them. She said nothing, yet the moment felt powerful, like the first crack in a heavy wall. Then thunder roared above them as if nature sensed something nearing. The elder signaled for guards to move into silent formation near the woods. The rancher stepped back, toward his land, heart heavy but hopeful. He felt that everything was headed toward a turning point, one that could either unite them or break everything. As he reached his horse, he whispered that he would remain close if needed. Without looking away, she touched the edge of her shawl with trembling fingers, a gesture that felt like an unseen thread between them. He rode home through rain that fell harder with each mile, feeling as if the whole land was preparing for something big. Lightning flashed across the plains, showing brief, scattered silhouettes of trees and rocks. He knew that the next hours might be the most important of their lives. Trust, misunderstanding, danger, hope. An unspoken connection collided like storm winds over open land, and as the storm deepened, none of them knew what the night would hold or how close hearts and lives were to changing forever. Rain poured through the night, like the sky was trying to wash the land clean of every hidden danger. The rancher barely slept, pacing from window to door and back again, just listening for any distant sound that might tell him which way fate had turned. The lantern on his porch flickered and cast long shadows that moved like restless spirits. Even his horse sensed unease and stomped inside the barn. Every beat of thunder reminded him that somewhere out there she was standing with her people, waiting, watching, hoping nothing terrible would unfold. He whispered a quiet request that the night would end with peace instead of sorrow. Not long before dawn, he saw a faint flash of movement near the fence line. His heart jumped, and he stepped out into the rain. A young Apache boy approached, soaked to the bone but breathing fast with purposeful energy. The boy said the strangers had been found and quietly driven away before they could reach the heart of the camp. No one was hurt, but the tribe remained unsettled, unsure if the men would return another night. The boy added that he was told to thank the rancher for his warning. The rancher nodded with relief, though he understood that gratitude was only the beginning. Trust was still fragile, like new roots in rocky soil. After giving the boy warm food and a dry blanket for the journey back, the rancher watched him disappear into the fog, feeling a cautious hope rise in his chest. The next few days brought clear skies and gentle winds. The land looked peaceful again, but no one forgot how close danger had come. The rancher continued his chores, though his thoughts often drifted to her. He wondered if she was resting, if fear had eased, or if old wounds had reopened because of the recent threat. He rode near the foothills a few times, but he did not expect or demand to see her. He knew that showing patience once was not enough. It had to be consistent, like the steady turning of the seasons. He reminded himself that silence could still hold progress. Even when no words or gestures appeared, one late afternoon, while repairing a fence near the open meadow, he heard gentle footsteps approaching from behind. When he turned, she was standing there, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hair braided neatly as always. Even seeing her caused his breath to quiet. She stood still at a comfortable distance, not hiding, but not rushing either. Her posture was different this time, calmer, like something inside her had shifted. She looked down for a moment, then slowly raised her face until her eyes met his. It was not a long stare, only a few seconds, but it felt like the land itself paused to witness it. He did not move closer. He only offered a soft greeting, and she answered with a quieter one, almost like a whisper carried by wind. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. They stood there with silence resting gently between them. No longer heavy or guarded, but peaceful. She explained that her people knew he had acted out of genuine respect and concern, not interference or pride. She also said that she saw him wading through storms and troubled nights, never crossing boundaries or turning goodwill into demand. Her voice trembled at times, but not from fear. It seemed to tremble because speaking these words meant opening parts of herself she had kept hidden for years. She told him that trust had always felt like a dangerous cliff, but his patience had built a safe path instead of pushing her forward. He listened with his heart more than his ears. When she finished, he gently replied that he made no promises he could not keep and no expectations she was required to meet. He told her that he meant it every time he said he would wait until she felt ready, not because he wanted to claim anything, but because respect was more valuable than any fast answer. She looked at him again, this time longer, and the moment settled like warm light across their faces. Over the next weeks, they met more often, sometimes near the creek, sometimes at the meadow, and occasionally at the edge of his ranch, where the old oak tree offered shade. Their conversations began slowly, with careful words, shared memories, and simple observations. She told him stories from her childhood, lessons from her elders, and the meaning of small symbols carved into beads and stones. He told her how loneliness had shaped him, how he built his ranch with long days and quiet nights, and how hope had kept him from leaving the land, even when life felt empty. Each time they talked, they learned something new about the other. Weaving understanding like a handmade blanket, thread by thread, trust did not bloom quickly like wildflowers. It grew gradually like young trees that survive wind and drought. Her people watched from a distance at first, unsure if this connection between two worlds would bring peace or trouble. But as time passed, they saw how he never stepped forward without permission and never asked for more than she offered. Slowly, they opened small doors of acceptance. Children from the tribe began waving at him when they rode near his land, and elders offered small signs of acknowledgement when paths crossed. It was not full friendship yet, but it carried hope. One evening, as warm orange light filled the sky, she walked with him along a trail overlooking the valley. Birds returned to their nests, and the air smelled of fresh pine and grass. She paused near a flat rock and said she wanted to explain the reason she once refused to look at him. She told him about the old betrayal, about how someone once earned trust, only to harm her people later. She said avoiding eye contact felt like the safest way to protect herself from seeing lies or false comfort. He listened without interruption, letting her voice carry every emotion it needed to release. When she finished, he did not try to erase her past with empty promises. He simply said he would walk beside her, not ahead, not behind. Until she believed in safety with her own heart, her eyes lifted with a calm expression, and she placed one of her carved beads into his hand as a symbol of shared trust. It was shaped like a small bird, with open wings. She said birds were known to return home even after long journeys, which meant trust could find its way back too. He held the bead like the most precious gift he had ever received. Their bond became deeper through gentle steps, not dramatic declarations. She visited his ranch sometimes, helping plant herbs near the porch and teaching him how to read signs in nature. He learned to understand quiet communication where presence mattered more than words. She laughed more often, and he felt his home slowly becoming filled with a warmth it had never known. Her people began visiting his land as neighbors, bringing woven baskets, herbs, or sharing stories. In return, he offered tools, shelter during storms, and honest partnership in time. She no longer looked at the ground when she stood with him. She met his eyes with strength and comfort, and it felt like two worlds finally understood each other without fear. On a calm evening, under a sky full of gentle stars, she told him she was ready to walk a shared path, not because she felt pressured or convinced, but because his patience had become a place she trusted. He smiled softly, touched her hand with respect, and thanked her for choosing the pace that felt right for her heart. Their story became known quietly across the plains. People in town noticed how the rancher no longer looked lonely, and the Apache people noticed how the girl who once guarded her eyes now walked with steady confidence. No grand celebration or loud announcement took place. Their union formed like nature itself, slow, respectful, and real. The land changed too. Borders became pathways, and silence became peaceful instead of fearful. The ranch no longer stood as a lonely house, but as a shared meeting place where two worlds learned understanding. He learned healing can come from patience. She learned trust can return when met with kindness. Their journey brought a lasting lesson for anyone willing to listen. Real respect does not rush. Real care does not demand, and real connection grows best where patience lives. With hearts no longer guarded by fear, they stood outside one evening watching the last light fade into the mountains. Grateful that waiting with kindness had brought two different lives into the same warm future.